Ever feel like you're always chasing someone who's constantly pulling away? Or maybe you're the one needing space while your partner wants constant reassurance. That push pull cycle isn't just exhausting, it's actually a common pattern called the avoidant anxious relationship dynamic. And if you're stuck in it, you're not alone. But the good news, you can fix it without losing yourself or the connection. An avoidant anxious relationship operates like an emotional tug of war, where one partner pulls for closeness while the other pulls for space. It's not about love being absent, it's about love being expressed in different emotional languages. The anxious partner feels secure through connection, reassurance, and emotional closeness, often fearing abandonment or disconnection. On the other hand, the avoidant partner feels secure through distance, independence, and emotional space, often fearing being smothered or losing themselves. This difference creates a loop that's hard to escape. When the anxious partner pushes for more, the avoidant pulls back. The more the avoidant pulls away, the more anxious the other becomes, and the cycle feeds itself over and over again. This dynamic doesn't mean the relationship is doomed, but it does mean there's a pattern in play that needs to be understood before it can be changed. The first step in fixing anything is seeing it clearly. That means noticing when you're reacting instead of responding. It means recognizing your own triggers instead of only focusing on the other person's behavior. If you're the anxious one, it's noticing how silence or space makes you feel unwanted or unloved. If you're the avoidant one, it's noticing how emotional demands make you feel overwhelmed or controlled. When you start noticing, you stop running on autopilot and start responding with awareness instead of defense. It's easy to label one person as the problem, but this isn't about fault, it's about patterns. Both sides play a role, and both sides are trying to protect themselves from pain in the only way they know how. The anxious seeks closeness to feel safe, while the avoidant seeks distance to feel safe. The key is understanding that neither strategy is wrong. They're just outdated survival responses built on past experiences. Maybe it was a childhood full of inconsistency or a past relationship that taught you love equals abandonment. Maybe it was growing up learning to rely only on yourself because no one else was emotionally available. These patterns are rooted deep, and until they're brought to light, they'll run the show. Fixing an avoidant anxious relationship starts with stepping out of the roles. If you're the anxious one, that means learning to self-soothe instead of seeking constant reassurance. It means grounding yourself in your own worth instead of waiting for someone else to affirm it. If you're the avoidant one, it means leaning into discomfort and allowing emotional closeness without interpreting it as a threat. It means recognizing that needing someone doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. Both sides have work to do, but the good news is that the work can begin with just one person making a shift. One shift in reaction creates space for the other to respond differently too. Understanding the cycle also means naming it when it's happening. It means pausing in the heat of the moment and saying something like, I feel myself pulling away right now, or I notice I'm getting anxious again. That awareness creates a gap between the trigger and the reaction, and in that gap, change can happen. Without awareness, the cycle keeps spinning. With awareness, you get the chance to choose something different. This isn't about becoming a therapist for your partner. It's about becoming emotionally fluent in your own experience so you can stop outsourcing your peace to someone else's behavior. When both partners understand the dynamic, they can stop personalizing each other's reactions. The avoidant partner can see that the anxious partner isn't needy, they're scared. The anxious partner can see that the avoidant isn't cold, they're protecting themselves. That shift in perception softens judgment, opens empathy, and allows space for real communication. It's no longer about who's right or who's wrong. It's about what's happening and how we can move through it together. Patterns thrive in secrecy and repetition. They lose their grip when they're brought into the open and disrupted with intentional choices. Awareness isn't the fix, but it's the doorway. It gives you the language to talk about what's really going on underneath the surface and the tools to stop dancing the same painful dance. Healing your own emotional triggers before trying to fix the relationship is the foundation for lasting change, especially in an avoidant-anxious dynamic. Too often, people rush into solving the relationship by trying to change the other person, begging for better communication, or demanding closeness without realizing they're carrying emotional wounds that shape how they react. Those wounds might come from a past where love was inconsistent, where affection was earned and not freely given, or where being vulnerable led to hurt instead of healing. Until those wounds are acknowledged and faced, they'll keep surfacing in your reactions, creating confusion between what's happening now and what was triggered from the past. You can't build emotional safety with someone else if you don't have it within yourself. That means doing the inner work that feels uncomfortable. It means sitting with your feelings instead of immediately acting on them. It means asking yourself, why did that comment hurt so much? Why did I feel abandoned when they needed space? Why did I shut down the moment they asked me to open up? Those questions aren't meant to shame you, they're meant to guide you. Emotional triggers are often signals pointing to something unresolved. When you pay attention to them, you stop reacting from your history and start responding from your truth. That shift changes the entire tone of your relationship. This work isn't glamorous. It's not flashy or loud. It's subtle and consistent. It's learning how to ground yourself when you're flooded with anxiety instead of reaching for someone else to fix it. It's pausing before you lash out, before you withdraw, before you assume the worst. It's recognizing that sometimes your emotions are valid, but the story you're telling yourself about them is distorted. Maybe they didn't ignore your text because they don't care. Maybe they were overwhelmed. Maybe they didn't avoid the conversation because they're heartless. Maybe they're terrified of saying the wrong thing. When you heal your triggers, you stop assuming the worst and start creating space for clarity. People expect relationships to fix what they've never addressed alone, but a relationship will always expose the work you haven't done yet. That's not a flaw, it's an opportunity. The anxious partner learns to soothe their panic without needing constant proof of love. The avoidant partner learns to lean into discomfort without pushing away the very connection they want deep down. Neither side is bad, neither side is broken, but both are responsible for their healing. And that healing doesn't begin with more strategies or communication hacks. It begins with facing the parts of yourself that you've ignored, dismissed, or avoided. When you start healing, you bring a calmer energy into the relationship. You stop walking on eggshells. You stop over-explaining. You stop turning every disagreement into a crisis. And in that shift, the relationship begins to breathe. The tension that once felt like a constant undercurrent starts to ease. You can be present with each other without drowning in each other's emotional weight. You can listen without preparing to defend. You can speak without fearing rejection. That's not because the other person changed. It's because you did the inner work that allowed peace to take root within you first. Healing your triggers doesn't mean you'll never feel anxious or avoidant again. It means you'll recognize the signs and know how to respond differently. You'll catch yourself spiraling and choose to ground instead. You'll notice your urge to run and instead stay open. That level of awareness becomes a gift to yourself and the relationship. It doesn't guarantee perfection, but it gives you resilience. It gives you the emotional muscle to face conflict without collapse. And it gives you the ability to show up for your partner without losing yourself in the process. That's where healthy love begins, not from needing each other to be okay, but from choosing each other from a place of wholeness. Stop trying to be the fixer in the relationship, because the more you try to fix someone else, the more you lose your grip on yourself. In an avoidant-anxious dynamic, it's common for one person, usually the anxious partner, to take on the emotional labor for both people. They try to manage every argument, control every outcome, and over-explain every feeling just to keep the peace. But peace that requires you to shrink, overextend, or constantly rescue the connection isn't peace. It's pressure. When you play the fixer, you send yourself the message that your needs don't matter as much and that your role is to earn love by solving everything that's wrong. That creates imbalance, resentment, and burnout in the long run. Trying to fix someone else often means you've made their healing your responsibility, and that's not fair to either of you. You start anticipating their moods, adjusting your words, and sacrificing your own boundaries just to avoid triggering them. But that doesn't lead to connection. It leads to confusion and emotional exhaustion. Real relationships aren't built on one person doing the work for both. They're built on mutual growth, mutual accountability, and mutual effort. You're not their therapist, not their savior, and not their emotional sponge. When you let go of the role of the fixer, you begin reclaiming the energy you've been giving away just to keep things together. Fixing becomes a form of control in disguise. You think if you can just say it right, do it right, explain it right, then maybe they'll respond how you want. But people don't change because you manage them better. They change because they choose to. And trying to control someone's reaction often keeps you stuck in a loop of overthinking and self-blame. You analyze every word, every look, every silence, hoping to decode their next move. But that hypervigilance is rooted in fear, not love. Love allows space. Fear tries to control. And if you're operating from fear, you'll always feel like you're walking on a tightrope, waiting for the next emotional fallout. The need to fix often comes from a deeper belief that you're only valuable when you're needed. That belief might have started in childhood when love was earned through performance or caretaking. Maybe you learned that being helpful, calm, or strong was how you received attention or safety. So now, in your adult relationships, you repeat the same strategy, thinking it will give you the connection you crave. But real love doesn't require performance. It requires presence. You don't have to hold everything together to be worthy of staying. You don't have to solve their wounds to deserve their care. And the moment you realize that, you begin to set yourself free from a role that was never yours to carry. Letting go of the fixer mindset means focusing on clarity instead of control. Clarity says, here's what I feel, here's what I need, and here's what I will no longer accept. It doesn't chase, it doesn't beg, it doesn't bend into shapes just to be seen. Clarity invites honesty, not manipulation. It opens the door to healthier conversations because it centers on truth rather than emotional management. When you bring clarity to the table, you stop rescuing and start revealing. You make space for your partner to step up or step out, but either way, you stay rooted in your own self-worth. You begin to notice the difference between helping and overfunctioning. You begin to see that support isn't about carrying someone. It's about standing beside them as they carry their own weight. You stop over-apologizing for being human. You stop making excuses for emotional neglect. You stop giving the benefit of the doubt when there's no action to match it. You learn to sit with discomfort without rushing to fix it. And in that pause, you build a new kind of strength. A strength that doesn't seek to control, but chooses to stay clear, grounded, and emotionally honest, no matter how the other person responds. Setting boundaries and sticking to them without guilt is a critical part of breaking the avoidant-anxious cycle, because without boundaries, you're not in a relationship. You're in an emotional tug-of-war. When one person is always giving and the other is always retreating, there's no balance, no safety, and no room for mutual respect. Boundaries are not walls meant to push people away. They are guidelines that teach others how to treat you and remind you of where your peace begins and ends. The problem is, most people confuse boundaries with ultimatums or think setting them makes them selfish or cold. But in truth, a healthy boundary is a sign of self-respect, not rejection. It says, I care about us, but I also care about me. People who struggle with anxious attachment often fear that setting a boundary will cause disconnection or abandonment. They think if they say no or ask for space or express their discomfort, the other person will leave. That fear keeps them stuck in people-pleasing and over-accommodating, even when it hurts. But abandoning yourself to keep someone else close isn't love. it's a slow erosion of your self-worth. Boundaries protect your energy, your values, and your emotional well-being. They give you a voice where silence used to live and offer structure where chaos used to reign. It's not about control, it's about clarity and self-trust. Avoidant partners, on the other hand, may see boundaries as demands or emotional pressure. But that's because they often interpret emotional needs as threats to their autonomy. That doesn't mean boundaries are the problem. It means the relationship has been relying on emotional guesswork and unclear expectations. When both people set and respect boundaries, the relationship moves from reactive to responsive. You stop assuming, stop tiptoeing, stop resenting. You start speaking up and listening with intention. That's where real communication begins, not in trying to fix each other, but in understanding where each person stands and what they need to feel safe and seen. Sticking to a boundary without guilt means accepting that not everyone will like it, and that's okay. The purpose of a boundary isn't to please, it's to protect. You don't need to justify your limit if it's rooted in truth. If someone only respects you when you're easy to deal with, their respect isn't real. The hard part isn't setting the boundary. It's holding it when pushback comes. It's not flinching when someone calls you cold. It's not backing down when someone tries to guilt trip you into silence. Boundaries test your strength not in how loud you state them, but in how quietly you enforce them. You have to get comfortable with the discomfort that boundaries bring, because every time you set one, you shift a dynamic that once relied on your silence. You start unlearning the belief that being good means being agreeable. You begin practicing emotional honesty over emotional sacrifice. And in doing so, you create room for the other person to show up differently too. Some will rise, some will leave, but you will stay rooted either way. Boundaries won't guarantee that a relationship survives, but they guarantee that if it does, it'll be built on mutual respect, not emotional imbalance. Every boundary you set is an act of self-clarity. It says, this is what I value, this is what I need, and this is how I expect to be treated. It's not about punishment, it's about protection. It's not about making someone change, it's about making sure you don't disappear in the process. When you stop explaining your limits and start embodying them, people learn quickly how to engage with you. Not everyone will stay when the rules change, but the ones who do are the ones willing to meet you in a space of mutual growth. That's where connection thrives, not in the absence of boundaries, but because of them. Communicating your needs without blame, shame, or fear is one of the most powerful skills you can build in an avoidant-anxious relationship, because so often our needs come out sounding like accusations instead of invitations. When you don't feel safe expressing what you want, it either builds up into silent resentment or spills out as emotional outbursts. Neither of those creates connection. But most people were never taught how to name a need calmly and directly. They were taught to hint, to hope, to stay quiet until it's unbearable. And when they finally speak, it comes out as frustration instead of clarity. The goal isn't just to be heard, it's to be understood in a way that builds closeness, not conflict. You have to learn how to separate your feeling from your framing. Saying, I feel like you never care, isn't the same as saying, I feel disconnected when we don't spend time together. One attacks, the other invites a response. One triggers defensiveness, the other opens the door to a conversation. Blame puts people on guard. Shame makes people shut down. Fear makes you silence yourself before the other person even has the chance to respond. That's not communication. That's protection. But you can't protect your truth and share it at the same time. You have to pick. And when you choose to share, you give the other person a real opportunity to meet your need instead of defend themselves from it. In anxious avoidant dynamics, communication often breaks down because each person is speaking from their wound instead of their heart. The anxious person may feel panicked and express needs in a way that sounds like control. The avoidant person may feel overwhelmed and respond with distance or silence, which only deepens the anxious person's fears. The cycle repeats until someone decides to pause, breathe, and speak with intention. That doesn't mean sugarcoating or avoiding truth. It means delivering it with responsibility. I feel unseen is more powerful than you never pay attention to me. One brings the focus back to your experience. The other puts the weight entirely on them and invites defensiveness. You can express your truth without raising your voice, without using ultimatums, and without making the other person feel like they're failing you. It takes emotional maturity to sit in the discomfort of needing something and asking for it anyway. It takes strength to say what's on your heart without trying to control the response. You can't manage their reaction. You can only manage your expression. And when you lead with ownership instead of accusation, you give the relationship space to respond with care instead of conflict. That's where emotional safety grows, not in perfection, but in the courage to speak with honesty and the patience to listen without judgment. Communicating without fear also means you let go of the belief that asking for something makes you weak or needy. Everyone has needs. It's not needy to ask for clarity, consistency, affection, or space. It's human. But when your needs have been dismissed in the past, it's easy to assume they're a burden now. That's why you have to practice holding your needs with confidence. Speak them clearly, calmly, and consistently. You're not asking for too much. You're asking the right person to meet you in the middle. If they can't, it's better to know than to keep pretending silence is working. What matters most is consistency in how you show up, not perfection in how you speak. You're going to stumble. You're going to over-explain sometimes or hold back other times. But every time you choose clarity over confusion, every time you speak your need instead of stuffing it down, you're rewriting the script. You're creating a new pattern, one that isn't based on walking on eggshells, but walking in truth. That truth won't always be comfortable, but it will always be clean. Clean communication clears the air, reveals intentions, and shows both people where they stand. It doesn't force, it invites. It doesn't threaten, it teaches. And in a relationship where both people are learning to speak and listen from a place of respect, the connection that forms isn't fragile, it's real.